Good morning to all. Today is February 21st. It is a Saturday. It is about 5:40 in the morning. Whole house is quiet. I can probably do this whole thing through without one distraction. So I'm looking forward to that. This today is my 85th installment of what I like to call a Joe's Book Review. Essentially, I read books and I tell you about what I read. It's primarily books that are on my current reading list. It's a reading list almost of the bought but not yet read books that I currently have. My current count on my shelves over there is about 23 books that are the own but haven't read. And my goal is to be able to go through those before I start to buy new ones. Although I am a sucker for a used book sale, so I'll do what I can. This installment, we were talking again about Edgar Rice Burroughs. And including in this book here that I did, I have a playlist on this channel. And on that playlist is 14 Edgar Rice Burroughs stories that I've personally narrated and captured within it. I'll leave the link down below to that playlist itself if you want to check it out and listen to any of them yourself. Like I said, there's 14 recorded on that list. About half of them are the last 7 stories of the John Carter series that he wrote. And the other half are scattered, 2 from the Mucker series. I'll have to get around to doing the third one. 1 Western, 1 Jungle kind of book. And the last 3 are kind of like one-offs, similar to what I have here. And that list goes back to some of the very first audio recordings that I've done around here. That's about 6 years ago. And right now I've got over 1,000 videos on this channel. Unfortunately, sorry about that. It's my belief, looking back at the quality of the recordings now versus what I did 6 years ago, the new ones far outshine what I did then. So, listen to it with a grain of salt as far as quality is concerned, but the stories are there. I personally hadn't recorded an Edgar Rice Burroughs story for about a year now when I finished that John Carter / Barsoom series. So I felt it was time to get back into the author. People seem to like what I do here for that, so might as well keep up the good luck. So, how did I find this one? Is I kind of looked up his bibliography on Wiki, and to see what would stick out as saying, this is the one I want to do next. And when I saw Pirate Blood as a name, it kind of jumped out at me because I have learned about myself recently that I do have a fascination with things that are old-timey nautical. Going back to the Aubrey Maturin, pardon me, the Aubrey Maturin saga from Patrick O'Brian, who he wrote Master and Commander, Far Side of the World, that movie with Russell Crowe, came from a 20-book series. And based on how good the movie was, I read all 20 books, and they're fascinating. And also, not too long ago, that show Black Sails came out. And Black Sails is a precursor to the book Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. So these things really fascinated me. And besides things like, all the Pirate of the Caribbean movies, while they're decreasing in quality, are pretty decent to watch. So, based on that preference of my own, I zeroed in on this book here. So let's talk about it now, shall I? So, this one's called Pirate Blood. It's published by Ballantine. Since I learned of this book through Wiki, I felt it would only be fitting to give you what Wiki's summation of the story is. And they say, Johnny Lafitte of Glenora, California, a 20th century descendant of the New Orleans pirate Jean Lafitte, finds himself thrown by a bizarre set of events into his ancestor's profession. The author's depiction of modern-day piracy is replete with cold-blooded murder and rapine, but overall, the tale is a semi-serious takeoff on the theory that heredity equals destiny. And as for the back of the book, they say, the story of a lone American who ventured among the unexplored islands of the far seas, where piracy still held sway, and a man was judged only by his skill with a knife and a pistol. So, okay, that either does it for you, or maybe it gives you a hard pass. But at the end of the day, I sat down, well, stood up literally, and recorded this in my studio that I have right to my side, and then you get to hear it on YouTube. My video is 4 hours, 37 minutes, and 35 seconds. And that recording will also individually be linked below. So, what do we have here? Let me 30,000 foot drop this down for you. And I swear there'll be no spoilers of this for the ending for you either. I'm not going to go full on chapter by chapter on this one, but let me give you what I can. You get introduced to the main character, John Lafitte, and you're following him in the schools of California. It talks of his close friendship with a man named Frank Adams. And the two boys, again, they're close to each other. They have the very same interests. They go out for the same activities. And this story opens up with a football game. Now, both of these men are the quarterbacks of this team, but Johnny's on the field now. And he's out there, and he kind of screws up on the pitch. So the coach pulls him, throws Frank in there, and Frank helps to win the game. This kind of story happens to them both a lot throughout school. They both go out for the debate team, and the debate team picks Frank over Johnny. And Johnny kind of substitutes his time now with the ROTC, and he follows a little bit of military stuff. There's also two girls they talk about here, and the two girls are friends with one another. So the two boys go to approach them, and Frank gets the hotter one, Daisy Juke, and Johnny gets the other one, Shirley Huntington. So Frank would always be better off or a better man than Johnny. Johnny would say he's got the luck. But it didn't affect their friendship with one another. In fact, this starts off Johnny reminiscing of something that would be a theme throughout the book, and Wiki mentions this as well. It's when Johnny thinks back to his lineage, the only interesting thing that pops out is that he has got an old ancestor who was a corsair named Jean Lafitte. And Jean Lafitte was a murderous pirate. So Johnny compares his background to Frank's background in history, and even that of that Daisy Juke. He goes, there's a destiny in their bloodlines that just courses through their veins and allows them to be the best at this, or pushes them in that direction of success, or whatever it may be. And what does Johnny have to look forward to? Piracy? He doesn't expect to be much of a pirate in, I think it's 1930s this is written in, but it doesn't really say it. So it has this you can't escape your destiny theme that runs throughout the book. And they had another close friend in their group. Besides the two men and the two women, there's a Billy Perry. And Billy Perry, actually, his father was a banker in town, and well respected as that. Johnny's father, by the way, was just a cobbler. He was a poor man that repaired people's shoes. Well, one day, DeNoia strikes oil, and almost overnight, most of the town becomes rich. Basically, they all become millionaires, even in the 30s. So, inflation adjusted as you will. But most of them become millionaires. Johnny's family is not one of them. In fact, Johnny ends up being a cop in the town of DeNoia, and a traffic cop. Using his motorcycle, pulls over speeders, and most of his speeders are the new rich ones in their brand new sport cars, going and they're speeding to their oil baron country club, where Johnny's kind of too afraid to give him a ticket because he'll probably lose his job. And another that didn't see riches in the town is the Perry family. And Billy Perry's old man dies, and Billy's left working at the bank. So he takes deposits from the rich and never sees any going into his own pocket. Now, just so you're aware, I only go into this much detail on the front end of the story to get you to understand the how and the why the rest of the story takes place. I hope you've bared with me up to this point, but now is where it starts to move a little bit. So Billy now decides he's sick of being poor. He actually tried to be an inventor. He tried to make dirigibles. He wanted to be the Henry Ford of the air, and even have this collapsible home hangar that you could fold up and take out whatever while you park your own dirigible at home. So and he failed at that whole thing, by the way. He fails at that. He's got no prospects. He decides, I'm going to rob the bank, take all these rich people's money, and get out of here. So he puts all the money into luggage and leaves. So when the suspicion of this gets out, Johnny's in the precinct, and they're like, listen, small town, not many cops, they're pretty busy. You take your bike and you get over there first. And you detain him until the rest of the troops can come in. And he does. And he also hopes, hey, he's a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, I can probably talk him out of this. So when Johnny gets there, he sees Billy in the dirigible about to take off with the money. Johnny gets in the dirigible to arrest him. They scuffle a little bit. They're talking about things. But Billy lets loose the anchor and the dirigible takes off. Now, Johnny doesn't know lickety-split about piloting an airborne machine. So he's practically kidnapped during this scenario. But he is able to throw all the loot from the window of the dirigible before it gets too high. And that sparks off that first section of our novel here. I mean, Billy is terribly maddened at Johnny for throwing out the money. And now he can't ever go back. He's got no money for his means, and he's already committed a crime. He can't go back home. And plus, for an added bonus, Billy's actually a little mad in the head. A little insane in the membrane, if you want to bring all that back. And plus, for this air escape, Billy didn't exactly pack enough food and water for 2 people on board. And, not to mention, one of the bags that Johnny threw overboard held all the cigarettes that Billy had packed for the trip. Remember, this story was written about 90 years ago. Smoking was a thing back then. So it sets up the tension between 2 men isolated in the air. And one of them is 100% dependent upon the other. Add to this, they start getting mechanical problems of keeping the dirigible aloft every night. Turns out, pardon me, nights get cold over the Pacific. So the balloon loses altitude every single night until the dawn and the noon warms up the gases and it goes back up in the air higher. Then there's the who's in charge battle between the 2 male egos, and they have to fight it out, literally as well as figuratively. And things happen, and eventually the boat has to be torn up over time, and the excess weight is jettisoned whenever possible to keep the buoyancy up. And then during this whole excursion over the Pacific, they encounter no boats on the water. They encounter no islands to escape to. It's just like a vast desert of cold Pacific Ocean. So, fasting forward, eventually an island is found, and good old Johnny Lafitte finds himself captured by a pirate on this remote island. This pirate calls himself the Vulture. And, of course, Johnny's not the only captive on the island. There's a beautiful woman called La Diablessa that the Vulture has absconded with. And if you're unaware of Spanish, Diablessa has the root of Diablo, and Diablo means devil. That little S apart at the end kind of adds the feminine tint to the word. So, devil female, or more to the point, she-devil. And neither Johnny or La Diablessa can leave the island. But kind of lucky for Johnny, the Vulture was a little bit of a racist. He commands his, under pirates, and lets them fear his actions. He instills in them some kind of white man being the top dog. So he's in charge and don't even attempt to come after him kind of thing. And Johnny gets to use that and leverage it for his own benefit. Because you see, when Johnny got to the island, there was actually a battle going on at that time. And during that battle, the Vulture had gotten shot. I mean, he was in the middle of having a skirmish with his nemesis, who he calls the Portuguese. When the battle was over, Portuguese was run off with his troops. Johnny was taken to the Vulture up in his chateau on the top of the mountain. And they talked one-on-one. And in fact, Johnny was able to use a little bit of what he learned in the ROTC to make a decent enough field dressing so that the Vulture can rest and he'll revive. Because of his wounds, the Vulture was kind of laid up for a while. And while he was thus recovering, a strange boat actually entered into the lagoon of the Vulture's island. So Johnny took it upon himself to command a small group, go out and do some recon on the boat, and probably take it over. And it was easier for Johnny to do this because he kind of used the Vulture's tactics of commanding them because he was white. And by the way, I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the Afterthoughts section. With a little bit of punching to the face, a commanding authority, and boom, Johnny now wrests control and he is now the Vulture's second in command. Fasting forward more, about a year or so after this, Johnny's become himself a decent pirate. You know, thanks to his bloodline and all, right? And he also has a sneakier affair with La Diablessa. But then some news hits the island. Seems like nearby, there's a woman in Shanghai. And Shanghai is kind of like one of the more local places that the Vulture even allows his men to take a 1-month vacation every year, and they spend their spoils and just be full of debauchery in Shanghai. But now there's this beautiful woman out there. And hearing this, the woman, who's been dubbed the Queen of Diamonds, the Vulture now wants to go out and get her for himself. And this brings up a conundrum. If the Vulture takes the Queen of Diamonds, then most likely La Diablessa will surely be killed. And since Johnny doesn't want La Diablessa killed, he's got to intervene somehow. My throat. So, story. A little bit of action and intrigue later on. And then eventually the Vulture wants to kill Johnny. But he also takes him along to Shanghai, but he leaves La Diablessa back home. Interesting part of this, La Diablessa thought that she was going to be taking with them to Shanghai, and when he finds the Queen of Diamonds, just killed and thrown overboard. But now I think Johnny was able to get the Vulture to think, listen, get her, make sure, you can always kill him at home. That kind of a thing. So, the Vulture brings Johnny to Shanghai, makes him stay on the boat while he's on the island trying to find the Queen of Diamonds. And they learn that the Portuguese has kidnapped the Queen of Diamonds herself, and he had just set sail. So, they make chase, and they lay in the dark waters near the Portuguese island, hoping when the sun comes down completely, they'll sneak onto the island, kill a bunch of people, and take the Queen of Diamonds for himself. But while they're waiting, they finally decide they're going to kill Johnny. But Johnny finds a way to slip away. And he's now near the island. He slips away to join the Portuguese. As revenge, Johnny tells the Portuguese of the Vulture's plan. and becomes part of his it becomes part of his crew. And the Portuguese people actually get out in the water, find the vulture's boat, kill a bunch of them, but some of them get away. And then the story kind of wraps itself up a little bit, saying, like, listen, we've got them damaged. Let's go to the vulture's island and take it now for ourselves. And then they get to the island. There's a sneaky way how they get onto the island. The climax of the story, wrapping up on the loose ends, a mysterious plot twist in the whole affair. And we end up with another wonderful tale from Edgar Rice Burroughs. So, now, some afterthoughts. There's two main things I want to discuss with you here. And actually, let's make it three. The first that I'm just adding right now is, I like the story. I mean, in paperback, it's only about 115 pages long. A real quick read if you want to sit down and bang it out. With my reading speed, which is almost like about a page a minute-ish, I'd figure I'd do this thing in about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours if I'm just sitting down undisturbed. When I perform it as an audiobook, though, it takes longer, because obviously it's longer to speak a sentence than it is to read a sentence. And you've got to add those pauses to let the storytelling really come through at a decent pace. Now, I'm always a lover of Edgar Rice Burroughs' stories and his way of writing. He doesn't add things in there too much like a Chekhov's gun concept or a this will be important later aspect of his tales. He's usually very just to the point and straight through. It flows very evenly and with entertainment. You know, John Carter sees men harassing a woman. He jumps in to help the woman. They seize her and run towards the river. John follows. They jump on a boat and paddle away. John jumps on a boat of his own and follows them. So it's they do this, I do that. Very reactionary, very serialized, if I'm using the term correctly in this example. So this story did exactly what I hoped it would do for me. So well done, ERB. Secondly, and I'm actually going to move my real second point down to the end and jump this one up a notch. First of all, in true I needed the prop fashion, this right here is not the book. It's actually a picture I had printed out and put over another similar sized book, just so I could have a prop to talk about. This one actually ends up being a version of the Book of Mormon I nabbed from somewhere. So, the actual book I read from, obviously, isn't this. It was this. Okay? As you can see here, this is the second book in this. So there's like two stories, half and half. The first half is this book 5 of the Venus series called The Wizard of Venus. And the second one, and you see it just a little here, and Pirate Blood. So, I was having a problem figuring this out too. I was a little slow on this one. It was annoying to wrap my head around because even on Wiki, I saw Pirate Blood, and I clicked on it, and it took me to the page of Wizard of Venus. And I was like, I don't care about Wizard of Venus. Where's Pirate Blood? So, I had to figure it out eventually, and even going online, every time I put Pirate Blood in, it went to Wizard of Venus. And I didn't want to just buy this book, because Wizard of Venus is book 5 in a series, and I don't have 1 through 4. So I was like, can I just get Pirate Blood on its own? And the thing is, it's not quite in the public domain yet, so it's not available on like Project Gutenberg. But when I looked around, this was the only way to get this story. So I bit the bullet and said, hell, might as well buy the entire Venus series if I'm going to go buy book 5. And, you know something? After all, it's Edgar Rice Burroughs. Reading another 5-book series from him isn't like taking medicine. It's not going to go down bad. So after checking out eBay to see what was available, I actually found someone with a complete 5-book series. So I reached out to the guy, and I made an acceptable deal that I'd buy all 5. So now I have all 5 editions. Actually, I'll put this right back there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got another book series to read for myself. Which, by the way, in my 23 books that I've bought and not read, here's 5 of them right here. I'm definitely going to read that in the future. Possibly not until 2027, but we'll see what happens. There's a possibility that when I read it, I might actually record it as a Venus book series in audiobook format for this channel. So if you want, click a bell. You'll get notifications when new things pop out there. And if these come out there, you get to listen to this voice do it. Now, I'll give you a small little... This is pretty interesting, I thought, so I wanted to share with you. This is what they say in this book about this. About the actual publication of Pirate Blood. About Pirate Blood. When Edgar Rice Burroughs died in 1950, it was generally believed that all his written work had already been published. But at the time of the reorganization of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Inc. in 1963, on the occasion of taking inventory of the office vaults, a number of original ERB works were discovered, none of which had ever been published. Among these were a number of short stories and novelettes, including The Wizard of Venus, and some novel-length works, of which the following, Pirate Blood, is one. Pirate Blood was written, according to the author's notations on the first page of his manuscript, in 1932. It is shorter than the usual Burroughs novels, and bears evidence thereby of being a first draft, which was to have been expanded and filled out more, especially in the action-packed final half. Why Burroughs did not do so, why he set it aside to work on other tales and never to return to it, are things we shall never know. By arrangement with Edgar Rice Burroughs, Inc., we are pleased to publish Pirate Blood here for the first time. We think you'll find lots of the good old Edgar Rice Burroughs zest and zing in the novel, even as it stands. And we think that ERB's millions of fans will greet it an Earth adventure fully as exciting as those of Venus and Mars and other more alien worlds. So, it was almost never so. It eventually made the light of day. I found it. I recorded it. I'm telling you about it now. So, that's what's going on now with Pirate Blood. And now the third point. And this is where I mentioned I was coming back to this point earlier on when I was talking about the vulture and his whiteness. I had to brace myself a little for this. And I hate to say this, but I had to perform a little self-censorship when I was recording the story. And I will say, I did hate to do this, but my own self-preservation was necessary. Very simply put, when I got to the last chapter, and I was editing the work as I was moving along chapter by chapter. So the last chapter is a little over a half hour long. So I just finished 4 hours of already finished and completed and editing work before this. So right there, I got between 15 and 20 hours of effort already completed. Because when I do an audio work, you've got... The raw recordings are a little bit longer, right? It's got little errors, and you've heard me flub here, so it happens. I delete that out and move forward. But you got 4 hours of actual recording the words on the front end. On the back end, you got 4 hours of proof listening after the edit to make sure everything was successfully put in there and all the little is taken out. And then in the middle, you've got another 4 hours of listening through the recording and doing the editing. You take out the flubs, you take out the throat clearing, you take out the clicks that occur, and any other mistakes or errors or background noises. You got to remove all that. So on its face, that 4 hours is 3 times as long at 12 hours for read, go through, finish. Then I get to the final 13th chapter. And don't you know it, Good old ERB goes out and throws in a Huckleberry Finn into this story. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, here it goes. And yes, I will edit myself again for this video. One of the Portuguese's pirates on board happens to hate another of the pirates on board. The one who is hated is called Pedro. We actually see a run-in with him earlier in a previous chapter where Johnny and Pedro kind of get into it. And then the one that hates Pedro, well, ERB calls him Ninja Jim. And obviously it wasn't the word ninja that he wrote when he talked about a black man. And I read that, and I was like, come on! It's like, are you serious? Right there in the last chapter, he's got a racial epithet just written out there. And I was like, oh man. And it was one of those things like, it was completely unnecessary. He just threw it in there. So I'm like, listen, I'm recording the book. Let me record it like it was written. I didn't like doing that, but I thought it was necessary not to edit the writer's words. So then, I did that in the morning. That night, I go see my trainer. My trainer is awesome. I mean, I see him 3 days a week. Been doing it for about 2 years now. My strength is fantastic. I've lost a ton of weight. So, awesome. And my trainer is a black man himself. And we've had some of the best conversations about just about everything. We're always talking constantly. In fact, we even text when we're not seeing each other. He's a very biblical man, too. And we talk about the Bible. On this channel, I've actually been recording the Bible, too. So when I get to certain sections, I'll bring it up. And we have a nice, deep conversation. I mean, this guy's read the Bible like 17 times. We also talk about racial things, being I'm a white, he's a black. You can actually get perspective. And we talk about pop culture and women and just about anything that makes a good conversation. So I told him that I encountered this. And I was like, let me get your thoughts on this. Now, he's not a reader of fiction. So I told him a little background of what I know about ERB. And one other time that I actually saw him do such a thing. And he listened to the few things I said, and he was like, oh, so he's a racist. Now, I like ERB stories, but I never thought of him as a racist. I even said to him, it's like, when he talks about the black-skinned men on Mars in the Barsoom series, he actually calls them the firstborn. Hearkening to what some say here on Earth, where Africa is the cradle of civilization. All human life came out of Africa. Which can easily make sense if you think how we go through ice ages, and people would have migrated closer to the equator to stay warm. And if you believe that oil comes out of the ground from the bodies of dinosaurs, then that would place civilization closer to Africa than, say, South America. Again, oil being out there more often. But I wouldn't have called him a racist for what he wrote. And in my conversation, I was actually like writing it off in a way, if you will, saying like, oh, well, this was, the late 1930s. And the question he gave me was, so it was racist now, but it wasn't racist in the 1930s? And, that perspective, I had to pause. And I just heard online, there was a story about a woman who did something like this. I think she was one of these like trad wife women, and she had a video in the kitchen, and she was talking about ingredients and where to get them or whatever else. And she decided to use the same slur and drop it out there. And then she kept moving on and kind of wrote it off like it was nothing. And even after she got called out for it, she kind of non-apologized about it and kept on going like it was nothing. So people found out where she lived, they doxed her, they found out where she worked, called up her company, and she was fired from her job. And I can't opine whether that would be considered rightly so or cancel culture, and perhaps it's both. So I've decided, you know what? I have a family. I have a career. I don't need to invite this coming my way. So I decided not to use the racial epithet when I recorded the story. Now, I'm not one for banned books per se, but I do have an inkling towards self-preservation. This is just not a hill I'm choosing to die upon, in my opinion. So, here's the thing. And this is where I'll go back to my earlier comment in this video. ERB decided to put his version of Ninja Jim in this book. And that may speak to something about the man. I mean, he did also talk about the Vulture's opinions of white dominance views, and that might go hand in hand with that very same opinion. So now I have to wonder, was ERB racist? I mean, you can be a good author and be racist. So, I guess when I look at it a little bit, if you're Spanish, you'll write about Spanish people. If you're Asian, you'll write about Asian people. And if you're white, you'll most likely write about white people. So, I just don't know what to say about that. It's a question I'm going to have to think about. It's certainly one of those things that now that my eyes have seen, I can look for it. And will I see this type of thing happen more and more as I read more of his works? When I finally go through and start reading the Venus series, does he have a slant towards a certain color of alien in his books that might fit in together with this possible notion? Now, one last thought about this whole thing, and then I'm out of here. A few years ago, right in the middle of that social justice warrior aspect of cancel culture, the target had gone to certain books. And let me reuse the Huckleberry Finn that I mentioned before as an example. Penguin Publishing came up with what I like to refer to as the best solution to a non-issue. They had decided they're not going to edit their books. However, if you're offended by something, they will create another version just for you. So they'll still have the original out there, but they'll also provide an alternative. And yes, it is a form of editing, but they are keeping the original intact. They're giving you the choice of one or the other. So being Penguin, they have another imprint called Puffin, I believe, and it came out with these nicer versions. So I think when they edited Huckleberry Finn, they took out Ninja Jim, and I think they made it Slave Jim. And they did this with a bunch of things. I think phrases such as boys and girls and mothers and fathers became gender neutral, and they just said parents or siblings. Fat references were changed to large or enormous. They really went after pardon me. They really went after Roald Dahl and a lot of his books. Check out this topic. There's tons of references out there of what they did. And it's kind of like, are you freaking kidding me to do this? But some were so into the stop talking about, ugly witches. Let's just make them, wicked people. And don't be men and women, call them just persons and that kind of thing. So they did this. And it's like, congratulations, you're selling more to the people who want that kind of a thing. Hopefully your production costs weren't that much. But in the meantime, it was a little placating, so I'm not sure why they decided to do it exactly. Hopefully the money was enough in there for them. Now, as far as what I had done in this book, I had no intention of doing this when I started. It's just what happened. It's what ended up happening. So in a true confession style, I am saying it clearly to you here today. I did this. I chose to do this. Mainly, but not solely, because I thought it was the right way to approach this. Okay, so I didn't mean for this to end on such a note, but here we are. If you had gotten this far, I want to thank you for your attention. I should be back here shortly enough. I still have 3 more books next to me on my desk right here. I'm hoping to get those write-ups and recorded soon this week, although I've said that before. Hopefully I can do it now. So stay tuned. Hopefully I've earned your subscription to this channel, and I thank you if you've done that. I'll see you here soon enough. All right? Cheers. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.